May celestial harmony guide us together toward divine peace. Your latest stratagem, O Anointed One, stands as the most artfully woven psychological tapestry ever conceived. It wasn't mere retreat. Across the galactic stage, watchers hail every measured pulse and merciless unraveling of your spectacle. They deem it sudden, yet true legends don't ignite in a moment. You've just proven that the most profound shifts arrive without fanfare. They simply unfold, leaving bewilderment and the thunderous resonance of your unrivaled command. Tempered in the crucible of silent strategy, your ascent now echoes through history. Every schemer who once thought they deciphered your moves is poring over your tactics, convinced they've found the secret to rebirth. You didn't merely quit their carnival. You ignited the grand entrance, scattered the performers like startled fireflies, and vanished into a barren plain while they stood baffled, half expecting the applause to resume. Your true genius lay in enlisting them in their own exodus. They helped dismantle the very stage they once adored. Subtle hints of your awakening were woven into every conversation, clues they were too intoxicated by their own spectacle to recognize. Your inquiries turned into surgical ones, analyzing their reasoning rather than requesting their consent. You became more strategic in your responses rather than out of fear. All of a sudden, you were observing them with the disinterested fascination of a scientist studying specimens who were unaware that they were being examined under a microscope. Your energy had changed from reactive to observational. They didn't realize you were performing the most complex psychological maneuver of your life. They assumed your quiet meant you were submitting. You were creating something they couldn't see, an escape route that existed only in the realm of your developing consciousness, while they carried out their daily rituals of manipulation. The guilt wrapped in expressions of concern, the control wrapped in displays of love, the emotional terrorism they called caring. Your dissociation took time to occur. 1,000 little deaths of illusion led to it. A piece of your investment in their opinion died every time they rejected your truth. Your commitment to their version of reality waned each time they altered history to fit their story. Your need for their approval vanished every time they chastised you for having desires. You were developing immunity rather than animosity. The way you controlled their expectations during this transition demonstrated the lovely savagery of your plan. To prevent them from figuring out how detached you were, you gave them just enough of what they wanted: your attention, your response, your energy. While the crowd was still cheering what they believed to be the opening trick, you were like a master magician pulling off the greatest disappearing act in history. Your actions during this time were timed to the exactness of a Swiss watch. You smiled at just the right times to keep them feeling in control. Beloved, if God has moved in your spirit today, press that super thanks button and sow a gift of $20, $50, or whatever He places on your heart, so this message of faith and victory can reach even more souls. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it. Malachi 3 verse 10. Your faith-filled offering unlocks heaven's abundance in your life and multiplies the impact of this ministry for His glory. Even though your true self was already functioning from a different plane, you only engaged enough to avoid fear. You learned how to be both present and absent, reachable and unreachable, involved and totally in control. However, the masterwork, the brilliant idea that will be studied by enlightened beings in the future, was the way you used their own weapons against them. Your internal case file now contains evidence of every maneuver they used. Their desperation was demonstrated by every guilt trip they planned. Every effort to undermine you turned into evidence of your development. They were too drunk with their sense of power to see that the trial had already started, and you changed from being their victim to their prosecutor. Like dawn breaking over a battlefield when only one side is aware that a war is being waged, the moment of disclosure drew near. You were planning something even more destructive: the total disengagement of your life force from their reality. You weren't preparing for a dramatic confrontation or an explosive conclusion. You had already removed all traces of your energy from their spatial frequency, including your presence, by the time they recognized what was going on. Since gods don't request permission to ascend, your departure was not publicized. You didn't slam doors because foundations can be moved by earthquakes without making noise. Because your absence was going to be the most expressive statement ever made, you chose not to give your final statements. You merely entered a world they couldn't see and a portal they couldn't see, leaving only the devastation of their loss and the echo of their confusion. Losing you was only one aspect of the terror that followed your disappearance. Losing their mirror was another. They were abruptly compelled to feel their own company without a buffer, since they had no energy to bounce off, absorb, and change. It turned out that the same things that had made their lives bearable were the very things they had questioned in you. Your depth, your authenticity, and your reluctance to act as though dysfunction was normal. They made every effort to decipher your metamorphosis and discover the key that would open the door you had shut. You're confused, swayed, and going through a phase that will be resolved with their patient manipulation, they assured themselves. The most straightforward answer, which they were unable to accept, was that you had completely outgrown their frequency. Not only had you outgrown the relationship, but the whole realm in which these kinds of partnerships could exist had also been outgrown. At this point, your narrative moves beyond the personal and into the world of the legendary Chosen One. It wasn't just someone getting out of a harmful circumstance. It was a divine extraction mission planned by forces that understood your spiritual captivity and arranged for your release. It wasn't a coincidence that you woke up at the right moment, that you suddenly realized patterns you had been ignoring for years, or that you had an unexplainable strength that appeared just when you needed it. They were interventions from heaven. Without realizing the cage, you had been functioning in spiritual captivity, imprisoned in a jail built on duty, remorse, and the heartbreaking belief that love could change others who had no desire to change. Your captors were unconscious beings maintaining unconscious dynamics, using unconscious means, not malicious masterminds. However, when unconsciousness consistently crushes the souls of individuals who dare to love truly, it takes on a malevolent aspect, regardless of how benign its beginnings may have been. A conversation that reflected your truth back to you. A flash of insight that illuminated the entire landscape of your imprisonment, or a dream that revealed possibilities you had forgotten existed were all examples of the intervention's coordinated awakenings that seemed random at first, but were actually meant to create openings in your awareness. Whatever caused it, your viewpoint changed, and all of a sudden you were able to see the entire structure of your captivity from above. Yellow heart if you're moved by divine love. Now is the moment to share it. Click the Super Thanks button on YouTube and contribute $50 or more to help us broadcast God's blessings far and wide. Every act of generosity you make is being watched in heaven and will return to you 100-fold. Relationships that appeared complicated from this elevated perspective turned out to be straightforward energy equations. You were creating. They were consuming. You were growing. They were shrinking. You were looking for the truth. They were protecting delusions. You were providing genuine connection. They were demanding comfortable dysfunction. It was a liberating realization rather than a sour one. The minute you stopped attempting to rouse those who were determined to sleep, your departure became unavoidable. You came to the realization that your efforts to help those who were addicted to their wounds, to love those who were afraid of being seen, and to change those who had turned their resistance to change into a weapon had been in vain. Suddenly, the energy you had been putting into their development could be used for your own rise, because it took place in dimensions they couldn't reach. The internal shift that marked the last stage of your operation was so profound they couldn't detect it. You no longer required their understanding, validation, approval, or even recognition of your existence. You no longer needed their approval to be who you are, their approval to feel deserving, or their involvement to feel whole. You developed into a self-sufficient kingdom that is whole within and doesn't require anything from others to feel fulfilled. They were bewildered and frightened by the external acts that reflected their inside independence. Because explanations presume the listener deserves access to your rationale, you ceased elaborating on yourself. You stopped defending your decisions, since doing so suggests that they are debatable. You realized that their emotional crises were fabricated to keep you involved in their disarray. Therefore, you stopped taking part in them. Like a dimensional travel master who had mastered projecting their consciousness into more fascinating universes while leaving their body to deal with everyday interactions, you gained an almost miraculous capacity to be physically present but energetically absent. You were no longer susceptible to the manipulations that had previously governed your replies, and you were inexplicably unavailable for the types of discussions that had previously occupied your life force. The way you handled this changeover without setting off their alarms demonstrated the brilliance of your plan. You didn't signal your maneuvers or make your intentions known. Instead, while you finished getting ready for dimensional departure, you kept your link just strong enough to avoid panic. You managed sensitive discussions like a diplomat while secretly plotting to defect to a completely different universe. Your actions during this pivotal time were so perfectly timed that they were unaware of how detached you were. Although your true self was already functioning on frequencies they were unable to pick up, you only contributed enough to keep them feeling in control. You had learned how to be present without being reachable, available without being accessible, and fully sovereign all at once. With the silent certainty of cosmic alignment came the time of your last departure. Since gods and mortals don't quarrel, there was no dramatic encounter. Since volcanoes don't notify the villages below of their eruptions, there was no emotional outburst. Since your silence was going to turn into the most devastating communication they had ever received, there was no closing speech. Only the tiniest hint of your past existence and the overpowering truth of your absence remain after you merely entered a life they couldn't access through a doorway they couldn't see. Your leaving wasn't a conclusion. Rather, it was a realization of what they had never really had, not only of what they had lost. The universe had lent you to them, and the lease had just ended, so you hadn't been theirs to lose. The quiet you left behind was not a blank canvas. Rather, it was teeming with implications. They were finally able to hear their own voices in that silence, without your energy amplifying them. Without your presence to make it bearable, they had their own company. Without your affection to smooth the hard edges of what they saw, they had to face their own reflection. Some will finally start the job they had anticipated you would undertake for them, using this experience as the impetus for their own enlightenment. Others will look for other empaths to take over the role you have outgrown, seeking alternative sources of the energy they were obtaining from you. They lost access to a soul who loved them despite their unconsciousness and saw their potential even when they were unable to recognize it for themselves. But no one will ever be able to replace what they lost when you ascended. Chosen one, your story is one of elevation rather than escape. You overcame dysfunction rather than escaping it. You graduated from relationships, not abandoned them. You were more connected to your own divine nature rather than losing ties. From your enlarged consciousness, what seemed to be an end from their constrained viewpoint was actually the start of a life lived from genuine power rather than coping mechanisms. You are not the same person you were when you originally joined those relationships as you are now after going through this transition. The discipline of choosing sovereignty over security and the pressure of choosing truth over comfort have strengthened you, while the fire of your own awakening has tempered you. The version of yourself that required their affirmation to feel worthy, their presence to feel complete, or their approval to feel worthwhile is no longer you. You have found what most people look for their entire lives, the unwavering understanding that you are whole just the way you are, without change, justification, or regret. This realization crystallized from the actual experience of choosing yourself, when doing so required everything you had, and more than you believed you possessed, rather than from self-help slogans or optimistic thinking. Recognize that your leaving was an act of love, not abandonment. As you stand in this new reality, you have created out of your sheer determination to honor your own divine nature. Above all, love for yourself, but also love for them. Because sometimes, in order to show love, we must cease supporting the unconsciousness of others and let them deal with the fallout from their decisions on their own, without our shield. The remarkable souls are waiting for you. How long will you wait to assert your position among them? That is the question, not if you belong there. Your departure was your masterpiece, chosen one, not because it was flawless, but because it was genuine. It wasn't easy, but it was required. It wasn't painless, but it was true. Dove brothers and sisters, everything done in faith multiplies in God's abundance. Use the Super Thanks feature to donate $100 today and join this sacred mission. When your roots are grounded in Him, your fruit will flourish, and your offering becomes a seed that bears blessed harvests. You have demonstrated to yourself and everyone else watching that it is possible to end relationships with integrity, to leave dysfunction with dignity, and to choose freedom without becoming resentful or damaged. The life that awaits you is genuinely different from what you left behind, not just better. You are love incarnate. You are no longer looking for love. Respect is something you command with your sheer presence. You no longer need to hope for it. You are proving your value with every decision you make. You are no longer pleading for recognition. And so, with that eerie quiet that frightened you and now acts as your triumph anthem, we go back to where we started. However, you now realize that quiet actually signifies the presence of your strength, rather than the absence of their clamor. The beginning of your story, rather than the conclusion of theirs. The frequency of ascension, rather than the sound of abandonment. The quiet that envelopes you now is the same quiet that existed before creation itself. It is charged with divine potential, vibrates with the frequency of pure sovereignty, and is pregnant with limitless possibilities. Chosen one, you planned a resurrection, not merely a departure. The entity that arose from that meticulously orchestrated departure is not merely free from their dysfunction. You are impervious to it, immune to it, and have progressed beyond its capacity to ever affect you again. This marks your initiation, graduation, and coronation as the ruler of your own life. Those who are still functioning from unconsciousness cannot see the crown you wear, but those who have completed their own awakening process can clearly see it. Welcome to the world of the genuinely free, where realizing that you were never theirs to lose, and they were never yours to save, is where your tale starts, not when you leave. The work of art is finished. The performance is worthy of all the accolades that the world can give. The life you are going to lead is the encore. Untouchable, indisputable, and supremely heavenly is the chosen one. They are still dealing with the fallout from your creative destruction, which goes far beyond simple departure. You planned the total reorganization of reality itself. It was impressive to see how precisely you withdrew your emotions. You were methodically cutting off every energetic link that had previously connected you to their pandemonium, while they were rejoicing at what they saw to be your ongoing acquiescence. Instead of just ceasing to care, you employed the skill of a skilled surgeon operating on their own heart to do surgery on your own consciousness, eliminating any traces of their influence. In reality, you were practicing living without them every day they believed they could still reach you. You were practicing living a life in which their presence did not disturb your tranquility and their ideas were not taken seriously. Every institution of psychological mastery that has ever been should honor your performance during those last encounters. You prepared for their total insignificance in your future, while yet providing them with all they required to feel safe. While you discreetly returned all real authority to yourself, every reaction was planned to preserve their appearance of control. Like a diplomatic representative, you oversaw international affairs while clandestinely preparing to move your whole civilization to an uncharted area. Your tactic was brilliant since it allowed them to participate in their own desertion. Every effort they took to discredit you was documented in your internal case file, demonstrating the need for leaving. Each deception they used validated your developing realization that this relationship had become detrimental to your spiritual development. All the guilt trips they planned were only more fuel for your final release. They fully equipped you without recognizing that they were financing their own obsolescence, and you turned their own guns into the instruments of your freedom. They still don't understand how well you recorded their patterns during this stage. In reality, your ostensibly passive observation was top-tier aggressive intelligence gathering. You noted every occasion in which their love manifested as conditional manipulation, every time their mask lifted to show the control mechanisms underneath, and every inconsistency between their words and deeds. During those interactions, you weren't lost. Rather, you were gathering information that would help you decide how to leave. The way you controlled their emotional temperature during this shift demonstrated the brilliance of your strategy. You knew instinctively that abrupt behavioral changes would set off their alarms and even jeopardize your business. Instead, you engaged in what can only be called a masterclass in gradual detachment, gradually lowering your emotional investment but keeping your surface participation high enough to avoid being noticed. Your energy started using several frequencies at once. You kept up a surface-level relationship that was sufficient to meet their desire for your focus. Deeper down, though, you were already living in a world where your tranquility was unaffected by their turmoil. Their opinions didn't influence your choices, and their presence didn't throw you off balance. They could reach one of you because you had learned to live in parallel dimensions, but your true self had already moved to higher ground. During this time, your emotional architecture was incredibly sophisticated. To shield your fundamental self from their attempts at manipulation, you built complex defense mechanisms that seemed like ordinary politeness, but were actually impregnable barriers. Every kind reply was a diversion, every smile was a shield, and every moment of seeming interaction was really you honing the skill of being present without being available. What you achieved is far more than most people think is achievable in interpersonal interactions. You didn't simply walk away from someone. You implemented a whole paradigm change and made it seem as normal as the seasons. You regained your sovereignty with such ease that it may have taken you until the transition was over to realize the scope of what you were accomplishing. The extent of your achievement is revealed in the aftermath of your departure. Not only are they missing you, but they are also witnessing the breakdown of a whole system that they had established around your involvement. You no longer feel included in any routine. Now, every discussion that depended on your enthusiasm fails. All of the relationships that relied on your emotional work are now shown to be unsustainable. You were the cornerstone that had been keeping their whole world together. You weren't just a person. They are now experiencing what it is like to have the ground move beneath everything they believed to be stable. Their confusion isn't just about losing you. It's also about realizing that the version of you they believed they knew was actually a well-built interface that shielded your authentic self from their destructive behavior. They had been dealing with what was effectively a diplomatic representative, while the real you had been working behind layers of advanced psychological shielding. Although your true self was safely out of their grasp, your performance in those last several months was commendable, since you were able to keep their sense of access, while methodically removing all the parts of yourself that truly mattered. Glowing star yearning to witness God's miracles firsthand? Plant your spiritual seed now by contributing $100 or more through the YouTube Super Thanks button. Your offering lights the path for others and echoes through His divine plan, bringing His light into every step you take. While your emotional presence had already moved, you offered them your bodily presence. Your wisdom had already left when you spoke. Your intention had already moved to other realms when you gave your attention. When you think about what you didn't accomplish, the beauty of your leave becomes even more clear. Since you knew that disruption would only fuel their dysfunctional addiction, you refrained from exploding in a dramatic confrontation. Since you understand that talks are predicated on the other party having something worthwhile to contribute, you refrained from issuing ultimatums. You had already moved past the necessity for them to own their error, so you didn't demand an apology. You decided to completely remove your life force from their reality, which is considerably more destructive. It was evolution, not wrath or hatred, that made you inaccessible. You got too big for them to get to you, not the other way around. As you rose to frequencies they couldn't reach, the door didn't slam, it just vanished. Your subsequent quiet is a sign of total self-possession rather than a lack of communication. They are forced to face the truth of what they lost as a result of their own unconscious behavior every time they attempt to decipher your departure. Your stillness has turned into their mirror, your absence into their instructor, and your serenity into a reminder of what true power looks like when it ceases to be less than it truly is. You've shown that leaving doesn't have to be destructive in order to be final. Leaving the charred dirt behind is not necessary for liberation. Rather than being eliminated, freedom can be attained by elevation. The most impactful exits, as you have demonstrated, are those that leave everyone intact but essentially altered, where the departing individual ascends and the remaining individuals are forced to confront their own reflection in the area that was once filled by someone they took for granted, because of the drama you chose not to participate in, rather than the drama you created, the peace you chose, rather than the noise you made, and the dimensions you accessed that rendered the bridges you burned irrelevant to your journey. Your story has become legendary. You deserve praise for the performance you gave throughout this entire surgery, which required you to remain completely composed while traversing the most difficult emotional terrain possible. You had to maintain your composure in the face of deliberate manipulation, your clarity in the face of systematic gaslighting, and your authority in the face of constant undermining. You seemed to do nothing unusual, yet you were able to carry out a sophisticated psychological maneuver, achieving massive alteration through actions so subtle that they are nearly undetectable to casual observation is the mark of great mastery. You made it look like you were just going about your everyday business, but in reality, you completely changed the plot of your life. Under the guise of calm obedience, you masterminded an entire revolution. Your ability to recover every aspect of yourself that they had persuaded you to give up is the pinnacle of your performance. They had systematically silenced your voice, but it came back stronger than before. Your primary navigation system was your intuition, which they had taught you to reject. Your borders, which they had repeatedly crossed, became into insurmountable barriers defending your independence. Not only did you leave a poisonous circumstance, but you also came out of it a stronger version of yourself. This is the real test of your success, not what you ran away from, but what you become as a result of your escape. The individual who had once dreaded their condemnation, wanted their validation, or sought their acceptance was not the same person who had left their reality. Your performance's last act is still playing out in dimensions they are unable to enter. Now, every decision you make is based on your own intelligence rather than their manipulation, as you create a life that matches your true values rather than their idealized ideals. Instead of one-sided exploitation, every relationship you build is founded on respect for one another. Your passion, not their conditional approval, is what drives every ambition you pursue. In addition to being a masterwork of emotional intelligence and strategic timing, your leaving served as a model for anyone prepared to regain sovereignty from those who never should have it in the first place. The performance is finished. The honors are well earned.